Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that while the world scrambles to respond to earthquakes, hurricanes, and wildfires after they happen, they are completely missing the country that has quietly become the global command center for predicting, tracking, and coordinating disaster response worldwide? And what happens when everyone realizes that the future of emergency management, climate disaster prediction, and international rescue operations isn't controlled by traditional emergency powers, but by one nation that most people think just experiences polite snowstorms? Most people don't know that Canada has become the invisible empire of global disaster management. Our seismic monitoring networks detect earthquakes worldwide before they hit population centers. Our atmospheric models predict hurricanes and severe weather with accuracy that saves millions of lives annually. Our search and rescue capabilities operate across 3 oceans and the Arctic, responding to emergencies that other nations cannot reach. But here's what should reshape how we think about crisis response. We don't just react to disasters. We see them coming and coordinate the global response. This isn't just about having good emergency services or earthquake preparedness. We're talking about controlling the early warning systems that give the world advanced notice of natural disasters, the prediction models that determine evacuation strategies, and the logistics networks that coordinate international disaster relief. But here's the question that will define emergency management geopolitics. What happens when global disaster response depends on Canadian infrastructure, and we control who gets advance warning? This is the story of how geography, technology, and emergency expertise are making Canada the undisputed guardian of global disaster preparedness, and why the next life-saving evacuation might depend more on Canadian monitoring systems than local emergency services or international aid organizations. Before we examine Canada's disaster control capabilities, we need to understand how dramatically natural disasters have become global threats requiring international coordination, and why controlling disaster prediction and response infrastructure has become a critical form of humanitarian leverage. The numbers reveal the staggering and increasing impact of natural disasters on the global economy and human life. Natural disasters cause over $300 billion in economic damage annually worldwide, with costs increasing by 6 to 8% per year as climate change intensifies extreme weather events. Earthquakes alone affect over 150 million people annually and cause damages exceeding $50 billion worldwide. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in Japan caused over $200 billion in damages and demonstrated how major seismic events can disrupt global supply chains and economic systems far from the disaster zone. Hurricane and typhoon damage has increased dramatically, with individual storms now regularly causing $20 to $50 billion in damages. Hurricane Katrina cost over $125 billion, while Hurricane Sandy exceeded $70 billion in damages. Climate change is intensifying these storms and making accurate prediction more critical for saving lives and reducing economic impacts. Wildfire damage has exploded globally, with annual costs exceeding $80 billion worldwide. The 2020 wildfire season in California alone caused over $12 billion in damages, while Australian bushfires the same year caused widespread international air quality impacts and ecosystem damage worth billions. Flooding affects over 250 million people annually worldwide and causes over $40 billion in damages. As climate change increases precipitation variability and sea levels rise, flood prediction and management are becoming critical capabilities for protecting populations and infrastructure. The most significant development is how natural disasters increasingly cascade across international borders through global supply chains, communication networks, and economic relationships. The 2010 volcanic eruption in Iceland grounded flights across Europe and North America, demonstrating how local disasters can have global impacts. International disaster response has become increasingly complex, requiring coordination between multiple countries, international organizations, and specialized response teams. The speed and effectiveness of international response often determines whether disasters become regional catastrophes or manageable emergencies. Early warning systems have emerged as the most cost-effective disaster mitigation strategy, potentially reducing disaster damages by 30 to 50% when populations receive adequate advance notice. However, these systems require sophisticated monitoring networks, prediction models, and communication infrastructure that few countries possess independently. This disaster complexity revolution is creating new forms of emergency dependence and humanitarian leverage. Countries that control disaster prediction and response coordination gain enormous influence over global disaster outcomes and international emergency policies. Now let's examine what Canada actually possesses in terms of disaster monitoring and emergency response capabilities. Our advantages go far beyond just being prepared for our own emergencies. We control global monitoring systems and response coordination networks that the world depends on for disaster preparedness. Let's start with seismic monitoring, where Canada operates one of the world's most comprehensive earthquake detection and prediction networks. The Canadian National Seismograph Network includes over 150 monitoring stations across the country that detect seismic activity throughout North America and provide data for global earthquake monitoring systems. Our monitoring network extends far beyond Canadian borders through partnerships with international seismic organizations. Canadian seismograph data contributes to earthquake early warning systems in the United States, Japan, and other seismically active regions. When major earthquakes occur anywhere in the Pacific Ring of Fire, Canadian monitoring stations often provide the first reliable data on earthquake magnitude and potential tsunami risks. The Geological Survey of Canada operates advanced earthquake prediction research that combines traditional seismic monitoring with satellite-based ground deformation measurements, providing more accurate earthquake forecasting capabilities than most national geological services can achieve independently. Canadian expertise in earthquake engineering and seismic risk assessment is consulted internationally for major infrastructure projects in earthquake-prone regions. Our building codes and seismic safety standards are adopted by countries seeking to improve their earthquake preparedness and infrastructure resilience. Our atmospheric monitoring and weather prediction capabilities represent another dimension of global disaster control. Environment and climate change. Canada operates sophisticated numerical weather prediction models that are used by meteorological services worldwide for hurricane tracking, severe weather forecasting, and climate monitoring. The Canadian Hurricane Centre provides hurricane tracking and prediction services that extend far beyond Canadian coastal areas. Our hurricane models contribute data to the National Hurricane Centre in the United States and provide independent verification for hurricane tracking used by Caribbean nations and international shipping operations. Canadian atmospheric research contributes to understanding how climate change affects severe weather patterns, providing scientific foundation for disaster preparedness planning worldwide. Our research on Arctic climate change helps predict how polar weather systems will affect global weather patterns and extreme weather events. Wildfire management represents another area where Canadian expertise provides global disaster response capabilities. Canada experiences some of the world's most extensive and severe wildfires, giving our emergency services unparalleled experience in large-scale fire suppression and coordination. The Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre coordinates wildfire response across the country and provides assistance to international wildfire emergencies. Canadian firefighting teams and equipment have responded to major wildfires in the United States, Australia, and other countries when local resources are overwhelmed. Canadian wildfire prediction models use satellite monitoring, weather data, and forest condition assessments to predict fire risk and behavior with accuracy that helps prevent small fires from becoming major disasters. These models are used by forest services worldwide for fire prevention and resource allocation. To understand how this translates into global influence, we need to look at how international disaster response depends on Canadian systems and expertise, and how this dependence creates opportunities for humanitarian and diplomatic leverage. Search and rescue operations demonstrate the clearest example of how Canadian capabilities create international dependencies. The Canadian Coast Guard and Royal Canadian Air Force operate search and rescue services across 3 oceans and the Arctic, responding to emergencies that cover vast areas unreachable by other nations' emergency services. Arctic search and rescue capabilities are particularly critical, as increased shipping and tourism activities in Arctic waters create new emergency response requirements. Canadian SAR teams often provide the only realistic rescue option for emergencies occurring in remote Arctic locations, giving Canada essential influence over Arctic maritime safety and sovereignty. Our SAR capabilities extend far beyond Canadian territorial waters through mutual assistance agreements and international conventions. Canadian teams regularly respond to emergencies in international waters and assist other nations when their emergency response capabilities are overwhelmed by major disasters. The Joint Rescue Coordination Centres operated by Canadian forces coordinate not only domestic search and rescue operations, but also provide assistance and expertise for international emergency coordination. These centers serve as models for other countries developing their own emergency response coordination capabilities. Tsunami warning systems in the Pacific demonstrate another form of disaster response dependency. Canadian seismic monitoring stations contribute essential data to the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, helping determine tsunami risks for coastal populations throughout the Pacific Basin. When the 2011 Tohoku earthquake generated a Pacific-wide tsunami, Canadian monitoring data was crucial for determining tsunami arrival times and wave heights for coastal areas in North and South America. This information enabled evacuation decisions that likely saved thousands of lives. Our tsunami research contributes to understanding how underwater earthquakes generate tsunamis and how tsunami waves behave as they cross ocean basins. This research improves tsunami prediction accuracy and helps coastal communities develop more effective evacuation procedures. International disaster relief logistics represent another area where Canadian capabilities provide essential support for global emergency response. Our military and civilian logistics capabilities have been deployed for major international disasters when affected countries lack the infrastructure or resources for effective response. Canadian logistics support was critical for Haiti earthquake relief in 2010, providing airlift capabilities, communications equipment, and coordination services that enabled international aid efforts to function effectively. Without Canadian logistics support, much international aid would have been impossible to deliver effectively. Military engineering capabilities developed for Arctic operations translate directly to disaster response in challenging environments. Canadian engineers have provided essential services for international disaster response operations, where local infrastructure has been destroyed or is inadequate for relief operations. I want to pause here because this raises an important strategic question that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. As natural disasters become more frequent and severe due to climate change, should Canada expand our disaster response capabilities to serve as the global emergency coordinator, or should we focus primarily on protecting Canadian communities and interests? This choice could define Canada's role in international humanitarian response and affect everything from our diplomatic relationships to our domestic emergency preparedness. What's your perspective on Canada's responsibility in global disaster management? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Beyond current disaster response capabilities, Canada is positioning itself to dominate emerging disaster management technologies and approaches that could reshape global emergency preparedness for decades to come. Artificial intelligence applications in disaster prediction and response are advancing rapidly, requiring sophisticated computing resources and comprehensive datasets. Canadian AI research institutions are developing machine learning systems that can predict disaster risks, optimize evacuation routes, and coordinate emergency resource allocation more effectively than traditional emergency management approaches. The Vector Institute and other Canadian AI research centers are working on disaster prediction models that integrate satellite data and weather information, seismic monitoring, and social media analytics to provide early warning of disasters before traditional monitoring systems detect emerging threats. AI-powered resource allocation systems can optimize emergency response by predicting where resources will be needed, coordinating between different emergency agencies, and adapting to changing conditions during disaster response operations. These systems could revolutionize how emergency management operates globally. Satellite-based disaster monitoring represents another frontier where Canadian space capabilities provide advantages for global disaster management. Canadian satellites provide high-resolution imagery and radar data that can detect disaster damage, monitor disaster progression, and guide emergency response operations. RadarSat satellites can monitor flooding, earthquake damage, and wildfire progression through clouds and darkness, providing continuous monitoring capabilities that optical satellites cannot match. This all-weather monitoring is essential for disaster response operations that must continue regardless of weather conditions. Canadian satellite data is used by international disaster response organizations to assess damage, plan relief operations, and monitor recovery progress. Our satellite capabilities provide independent disaster assessment data that helps coordinate international aid and prevents duplication of relief efforts. Drone and unmanned systems technology is becoming increasingly important for disaster response operations in dangerous or inaccessible areas. Canadian companies are developing specialized drones for search and rescue operations, damage assessment, and emergency supply delivery in disaster zones. These unmanned systems can operate in conditions too dangerous for human responders while providing real-time information about disaster conditions and survivor locations. Canadian expertise in operating unmanned systems in harsh Arctic conditions translates directly to disaster response in extreme environments. Climate adaptation and resilience planning represent another area where Canadian expertise provides global leadership. Our experience adapting to extreme weather conditions and climate variability provides models for other countries developing climate resilience strategies. Canadian research on climate change, impacts, and adaptation strategies is used by international organizations developing climate resilience plans for vulnerable regions. Our expertise in managing infrastructure in extreme climates helps other countries prepare for climate change impacts. However, expanding Canada's disaster management leadership requires strategic investments in monitoring infrastructure, response capabilities, and international partnerships that many Canadians don't fully appreciate. Disaster monitoring infrastructure requires continuous investment in equipment, technology upgrades, and skilled personnel. Seismic monitoring networks, weather prediction systems, and satellite monitoring capabilities all need regular updates to maintain accuracy and reliability. The Canadian Hazards Information Service needs expanded funding to maintain our monitoring capabilities and develop new prediction technologies. Disaster prediction is increasingly competitive globally, requiring significant investment to maintain technological leadership. Emergency response capabilities need expansion to handle increasing disaster frequency and intensity. Climate change is making disasters more severe and more frequent, requiring larger and more sophisticated emergency response capabilities. International coordination frameworks are essential for disaster response that increasingly crosses national borders. Canada needs diplomatic strategies and agreements that facilitate international disaster response while protecting our interests and capabilities. Training and workforce development in emergency management, disaster science, and response coordination are critical for maintaining Canadian expertise. These specialized skills require years to develop and need continuous updating as disaster management technologies evolve. Research and development in disaster prediction and response technologies need sustained investment to maintain Canadian leadership. Disaster science is advancing rapidly, requiring continuous research to develop more effective prediction and response capabilities. If you're finding this analysis of Canada's disaster management transformation valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us continue producing in-depth analysis of the emergency management and safety trends that are protecting communities worldwide. The disaster management revolution represents one of the most critical but underappreciated aspects of global safety and security. Countries that achieve leadership in disaster prediction and response will save millions of lives and prevent trillions of dollars in damages, while gaining significant influence over international humanitarian policies. Canada possesses disaster management advantages that are impossible for most other countries to replicate quickly. Our geographic position provides natural monitoring locations for global disaster systems. Our experience with extreme weather and challenging environments gives us expertise that temperate countries cannot develop easily. But possessing these disaster management advantages is not the same as leveraging them strategically. Canada needs to make conscious decisions about how to use our emergency capabilities while maintaining the humanitarian values and international cooperation that make global disaster response effective. The next decade will be critical for establishing our role in global disaster management. The investments in monitoring systems, response capabilities, and international partnerships we make now will determine whether Canada becomes the global leader in disaster preparedness or simply provides emergency services for other countries' disaster management strategies. The choices we make will affect not just our own safety and security, but our ability to contribute to protecting global populations from increasingly frequent and severe natural disasters. Friends, we are living through the transformation of disaster management from local emergency response to global strategic capability. While the world's attention focuses on disaster recovery and reconstruction, the real power lies in the prediction systems and response coordination that can prevent disasters from becoming catastrophes. Canada has quietly become the invisible guardian of global disaster preparedness. Our monitoring systems detect earthquakes before they hit populated areas. Our prediction models track hurricanes across ocean basins. Our rescue teams respond to emergencies that other nations cannot reach. The question isn't whether Canada can become a major power in global disaster management. We already are, through our unique combination of monitoring capabilities, response expertise, and geographic advantages. The question is whether we'll have the vision and commitment to leverage our disaster management capabilities strategically while maintaining the humanitarian focus that makes emergency response effective. The emergencies are increasing, the disasters are intensifying, and the future of global safety is being determined by countries that can predict disasters before they happen and coordinate response more effectively than traditional emergency management approaches. Canada has the monitoring systems to see disasters coming, the expertise to predict their impacts, and the capabilities to coordinate effective response. What we do with this disaster management opportunity will determine not just our role in international emergency response, but our contribution to protecting human life and reducing suffering when natural disasters threaten communities worldwide. The disaster revolution is here, and it depends on Canadian monitoring systems, Canadian prediction models, and Canadian emergency expertise. Canada can either embrace our role as the invisible empire of disaster management or watch others take control of the systems that keep the world safe from natural catastrophes. Thank you for joining me for this exploration of Canada's disaster empire. What aspects of our emergency management dominance do you think offer the most potential for saving lives globally? Should we focus on prediction systems, response coordination, or international assistance capabilities? Share your insights below, and I'll see you in the next analysis of the forces shaping our emergency management future.